Interviews are a skill, and it's something that you can get better at over time. Now in this video, I'm going to share with you 4 practical tips to help you to improve your performance in law firm interviews. Now my first piece of advice is to dedicate practice time. Now interviews generally are just a weird situation to be in. It's not normal in your day-to-day life to talk about your motivations in that way, or to look back on, the spread of your experiences, or to sell yourself. Often in normal situations that would be seen as bragging. So you're probably very used to downplaying the experiences that you do have. The same goes for talking about commercial issues. You'd be very lucky to be in situations in your day-to-day life where you happen to talk about the commercial stuff that you see in the news. But that's exactly what you need to do in an interview. Now, often what I see is you have these technically knowledgeable candidates. So they're, reading the FT every day, they've really researched the commercial news, and then you ask them a question like, why does a company buy another company? And they really struggle on that question. And the reason is they have so much knowledge, they've done the reading, but they haven't practiced this ability to communicate it just in a verbal form. And so if this was me going into an interview, I have a sense of some of the questions that I'll be asked. Why this firm? Why commercial law? A certain commercial news topic that I'm interested in, where a firm might open its next office or practice area. And what I would do is just keep practicing my answers, but aloud. In the shower, walking around the house, I'd record myself on Zoom. I'd just keep practicing. And what you'll notice is the more you speak about these points, the more comfortable you get at communicating these points clearly. And that will really put your reps in, develop your ability to communicate these thoughts and ideas that you have in verbal form when you get to an interview. However, this links to my second piece of advice, which is not to script or over-rehearse your answers. I often see this with candidates. Now, the first ever in-person event we ran at TCLA, I had this long introduction to do at the beginning. I made the mistake of scripting that whole introduction. The problem was when someone asked a question, it completely threw me off and I went off script, and I really struggled to get back onto the script. I ended up having to scrap the whole thing. It just didn't look great, to be honest. Obviously that can happen in an interview situation, but actually I think the problem in an interview could be a lot worse, not just because you forget your answer, but even if it goes well, scripted answers often come across as inauthentic. It's really obvious when you're not present in the moment, you're trying to remember something that you've written about before, and that can damage your ability to build a rapport with the interviewer. Plus there's the fact that there's probably a difference between the way you write about things and the way you speak it. So in an interview, in your why law answer, if you started discussing the interplay between law and business, or using some of the buzzwords that are common in applications, it doesn't feel that natural if you say that verbally. So in my view, what I would do is bullet point your answers to the questions you can expect, and that's perfectly fine to do. The great thing about that is you have these points to anchor, which you can go back to, and you can also practice giving each bullet point in a slightly different order. Again, it's just going to develop your ability to handle situations if the questions are slightly differently, and it also helps you to come across as authentic. So to give you an example, say for the question, what's my biggest weakness? In a law firm interview, I used to say that I tend to be quite reserved. I can imagine the impact this would have because in a client situation, I would want to build a relationship with them, and that can be impacted if I do come across as quite a reserved person. Now, if I was preparing that answer for an interview, I would just have 2 bullet points in mind: reserved, impacts client relationships. That's all I have to remember, and I can say it in a different way each time, as opposed to scripting that full answer. Now, my third tip is to break out of interview mode. So this is something I often see with candidates are actually doing quite well. For example, they've practiced their answers to questions, they can compose themselves well for an interview, but then they find themselves just getting lots of rejections. And obviously there's many reasons that could be, but I think this is a big one because it prevents your ability to stand out in an interview. And when I say interview mode, I mean they often come across as quite rigid and stoic in their answers. They're very well practiced and well polished, but it's always too perfect. For me, the key to delivering a good interview is to be authentic. It's often found in the small parts of humor you add when you talk passionately about your motivations or the hobbies and interests that you have, or you're just able to be present and in the moment. They're willing to build a rapport with the interviewer, and it just feels in the moment like the answers are genuine. Now, how you get out of interview mode, I think, is a very individual process. For me personally, it comes down to just getting outside of my head, which means, just trying to be present in the moment, feeling my feet on the floor. Maybe that's listening to music before I have to do something. It just really helps me to be present as opposed to just being up here in my head. The other thing I used to do is to imagine I knew the interviewer already, and that can be really helpful just to break down this barrier of an interviewer-interviewee relationship, make it feel more conversational, make an effort to talk to the person that's asking me questions. It's that kind of thing that I think really helps you to stand out in an interview. Now, my final piece of advice is about spiking your anxiety. What I mean by this is we've talked about practice. Yes, you can practice alone. I still think that's very, very useful for getting used to communicating your thoughts. However, in an interview, you're not going to be in your room. You're going to be dressed differently. You're going to be in a law firm, which could be intimidating. And so the goal is to put you in that environment as closely as possible. Now, the more you can simulate that as closely as possible, it means there isn't as big a shift when you get into a law firm environment, and that can help you to be more present as well. Perhaps been in a situation in an interview where, your heart is pounding, you're short of breath, and that can make it really hard to say what you want to say. And if you've ever been in a situation where you look back on your interviews and you knew the answers to the questions and you're frustrated at yourself for not being able to answer the way you wanted to, this can help with that. It can help to make you nervous beforehand, and then in the real thing you're not as nervous. So for example, recently when I had a webinar, I practiced the presentation I was going to do in front of someone at the team, and that was really helpful because I was nervous for the practice, but then I was so much less nervous for the real thing. And I also had the opportunity to work out which elements worked well and which areas I could improve on as well. So that's my 4 tips for quickly improving your interview performance. I am running a free workshop on interviews next week, which you can join, and I'll talk more about my advice on interviews. And if you feel like you would benefit from a more intense level of training, we launched the TCLA Academy in 2 weeks. The first cohort will be talking about interviews. Then next month we'll talk about commercial awareness or vacation schemes. It's a monthly program with sessions over the course of 1 week. It's very practical, and it's designed to teach you a variety of skills that will be useful to securing a training contract and beyond. Otherwise, best of luck in your training contract journeys.